So there are just a couple of things we're hoping to do in the remaining time. First is I will tell you a little bit about our plans for the future, which are already to some extent informed by what's happened this weekend. But it would be great to use a bit of that remaining time to hear from you what other things you think we should be doing, or if you think the things we are planning are crazy. Then Fiona's going to summarise the themes from the discussion groups this morning, and then it would be nice to have a few minutes for anything you'd like to discuss. So, as I say, we'll wind up at 4, and if you do need to go off to catch a train or a plane or a taxi, please do. So, this has proved a very fascinating and fruitful project for us, and I guess it must be of interest to you, because many people have come some distance to spend the weekend with us, which has been absolutely great. It's been an enormous pleasure to have you here, and actually my one regret about the weekend is that I haven't had a chance to talk to everyone individually, so I'm sorry about that. I hope the conversations will continue in other places and at other times. Let me just tell you briefly, if I may, about the things that we envisage doing over the next while, or would like to do if we could, and as you see, it's quite a long list. So, because of the generosity of the people who've been in touch with us, we now have an enormous database. Emails from 12,000 people, questionnaires which we've analysed from a couple of thousand, and I think probably another couple of thousand in the bank. So we'd like to look much more closely at what people have said. So we've kind of coded some of the things that you've told us. Do you dream visually? How's your autobiographical memory? But people have given really interesting accounts of their experience, and it would be lovely if someone like Matthew had the opportunity to sit down for a year and work through those sort of narratives. And then factor analysis. I think we're pretty sure that there's more than one thing going on here. So there are some people with aphantasia who have trouble recognizing faces. Maybe they're a special group, because there are others who don't have any trouble recognizing faces, and so on with autobiographical memory. So I think there are probably a number of subgroups, and this is the kind of thing statisticians can do quite well. They can look at a body of data and say, are there some subgroups here? So that would be an interesting endeavour. And then there's quite a bit more I think we could do with online questionnaires. So the questionnaire that most of you have completed is, of course, an online questionnaire, but we could post some online tests which would examine such things as memory, face recognition, autistic spectrum disorder, object versus space imagery, other senses. So there's been quite a lot of interest in whether other senses are involved in aphantasia, synesthesia, and personality. But you can only go so far online. There are some things which are better done face-to-face, and they will enable us, I think, to validate, if you like, the reports that people are giving of their imagery vividness using neuropsychological tests and brain imaging and EEG. And that's going to tell us something about the mechanisms, the brain mechanisms that are underlying these variations in experience, and will also shed light on the existence of subgroups. Genetics, so people are describing, a number of people have said that several members of their family share similar experience, so that rather suggests that there may be some genetic factors involved. It doesn't have to be genetic, of course, it could be a matter of family style, but it seems quite likely that genetics are involved. There happens to be an extraordinary study called the UK Biobank, so maybe this is worth mentioning to the North Americans here. It's rather a secretive study. I don't know if the British are secretive by nature, but 500,000 people have been recruited to this study, and 100,000 are having whole body and brain scans. So some imaging factories have been built, which are processing Biobank volunteers. And these are just ordinary people who are giving their time and their samples. And if you pay a certain amount of money to Biobank, they will include your questionnaire in their protocol. So there is a huge amount of imaging data and genetic data available in Biobank, and if we knew the VVIQ scores of 50,000 of those people, we could learn a great deal. Some people in this room have lost the ability to visualize because of something that's happened, a brain injury or an episode of depression. There are both neurogenic and psychogenic causes of aphantasia, and there are certainly things to learn about these variations in experience by studying people whose experience changes in the course of their lives. Many people have expressed some interest in imagery enhancement, even if only temporary, something that Joel has spoken about, so that's a theme for the future. And then there are all kinds of other things that we could do. Illusions, Fiona's been talking about. Experience sampling, so there are the nice techniques by which every hour or two at random a buzzer rings in your pocket and you have to immediately write down what's in your mind. It'd be interesting to know how the kind of the hour-to-hour, day-to-day experience of people with aphantasia and hyperphantasia differs using that sort of technique. I think there are really interesting things to find out about dreaming. So 50% of people with aphantasia dream despite not having wakeful imagery, but then there's the half who don't, who describe very interesting kinds of non-avisual dreaming. Narrative, dreaming a story, dreaming in emotions. That's been barely explored at all. Working memory, Joel has spoken about. Do eye movements differ in people who have and don't have visual imagery? So there's a bit of evidence that when people are recollecting a recent event, their eye movements to some extent trace out key features of that event. Does that happen in people with aphantasia or not? And then there are the implications for education, which we've talked about a little in this meeting. Therapy, again, we've discussed. Creativity and philosophy. So there's plenty to do. And I've just underlined a few topics which have been highlighted by you during the course of the meeting as being of particular interest. What's the point? It's clearly interesting. Many of us think it's interesting, but where is it going to take us? Well, I think if we can do some of this work, it will help to validate imagery experience. So I guess there is still a question in the back of many of our minds about how accurately can you report your own experience? How do you know? How can you be sure that your imagery is more or less vivid than someone else's? There's still that philosophical problem, if you like. If you can show that different things happen in the brains of people with aphantasia to those with hyperphantasia when they're thinking about something, that helps to make it clear that those first-person reports are telling you something important and interesting. I'm sure they are, but we need to do more work to prove that, I think. This work would allow us to understand more about the neural basis of imagery variations, the genetic basis, their psychological implications, and something about approaches to enhancement. So that's the way in which I see the research going. I'm going to mention funding, and I apologize for doing this, but research costs money. And here is the way the sums look. So conducting the kind of survey that you've contributed to is pretty cheap. We've just paid a bill for a couple of £100. Employing a student for an internship costs about £1,000. We haven't been able to do that in the past. Our students have, on the whole, been giving of their time for free. If you do an imaging study, you tend to have to pay participant travel costs of maybe a couple of £1,000s. If you are paying for scanning, which we may have to do in future, though we haven't up till now, a reasonable sized study is quite expensive. It costs about £30,000, so I don't know how many dollars that is now, $40,000, $50,000 to conduct an imaging study. If you employ a postdoc for a year, it's somewhere around $50,000, and if you conduct a program of research, the kind of program that would allow you to take a reasonable bite out of the work I've described, it's getting on for £1 million. How are we going to find those funds? Well, we are going to spend the next couple of days thinking about that. We'll probably put in an application across the UK Research Council. So we have in the UK a Medical Research Council, an Economic and Social Science Research Council, Arts and Humanities Research Council. I think this topic is one that really does bridge their interests. So we're going to try to hold them to their word. They say they want to fund interdisciplinary research, so we're going to tell them that this is a really fantastic interdisciplinary project, and they better had. And then we can go to the Wellcome Trust, which you may know about. It's a hugely wealthy trust, which again says that it wants to fund interdisciplinary work, but it's quite often quite hard to pin it down. And then, if anyone wants to give us a lot of money to conduct research, my university tells me that they make it very easy to accept gifts.
Is the Wellcome Fund related to Burroughs Wellcome?
The money came from the pharmaceutical business originally, but it's now an independent trust. And then sort of turning to you, So you've been very generous, many of you already, in taking part in our research, and I hope you may continue to. So we've tried not to bombard you with too many emails, but forgive us if there are occasional emails in future, and they'll be inviting you to take part in online research or possibly face-to-face research if you're local. And then it would be great if you could help us plan what we do. So if anyone is really interested in that and would like to be part of a small group of people to whom we can send ideas and maybe a grant proposal now and then, let me know, because it would be nice to set up a research partnership group of interested participants. And similarly, if you have any ideas for how we might raise funds, I know that Joel has done some crowdfunding in Sydney for his imaging study. It would be great to hear about those. And still thinking in terms of your participation, I hope that this weekend's provided an opportunity for a new community to form. I have the sense that some new friendships have probably been forged over the course of the weekend, which is wonderful. And I hope that this has been an opportunity to have some fun as well as think about this topic. So that's all I had to say on that theme. But please, yeah.
I created a Google group called Extreme Imagination for anybody that just wants to discuss things.
That's great. So we.
Google Groups.
Okay, so we will, at the end of in a week or two, we'll send an email to everyone with some sort of summary of the meeting. Some people have said they'd be interested in having a book list, and if you can get in touch with us and give us the address, then
I'll email and see when I go.
That'll be great. So you were also suggesting that there should be a kind of discussion forum.
Yes.
Excellent. So before we turn to the themes from the discussion groups, anything else anyone would like to suggest?
So there are many North Americans here. Have you reached out to any North American potential collaborators? Other universities?
So have we? I think the answer is not yet. If you have anyone in particular in mind, do you think?
I live in Durham, North Carolina, so of course I think about Duke University and the University of North Carolina.
I think they do very good brain imaging. Yeah. I have had a look at one or two possible funding sources from the States, but they're quite often US specific. That's surprising.
I'm assuming
Good
the
reason to
Costlin.
collaborate.
I'm guessing the Costlin lab still exists. The Costlin lab.
Yeah. So he's actually moved on. He's now starting a new educational institution. Any other thoughts about research directions we should or shouldn't be pursuing? Nick?
Not what I'm going to say, obviously, but you know that the parallel track of memory, episodic memory, is obviously of great interest to some people.
Yeah.
And the Biobank group is, of course, an extremely fine example, and Botman are an extremely fine example of the North American Brain Research Institute of high caliber as well. I mean, I don't know whether you can sort of overtly collaborate with them, but at least one set of end users will always be interested in whatever synthesis you and they can draw between what you and they are doing.
Okay, that's true. So and I've had discussions with them. So that's the group in Toronto who've described the severely deficient autobiographical memory syndrome, which seems to have some overlap with aphantasia.
fMRI testing.
Yeah.
Have you had any connection with the Dunedin study, which seems to me that would fit in well? That's the study in New Zealand of the population of the city of Dunedin from about 40 years ago, and it's a continuous study. And they could incorporate the VBIQ questionnaire, and it would benefit them and you to get some information between each other.
Okay, so they have
this enormous study.
it's a little like Biobank, is it? They have brain imaging data. Okay.
They've been doing it for 40 years.
Yep. No, I've heard of it. Okay, I'll note that down. Any other thoughts, Alan?
promoting more awareness. I mean, we had the BBC here on Friday. Is there anything we can do from our side to help that?
I think you've done a lot.
But if there's anything that you think, okay, if you guys have any contacts that you want to share that with, or we get any things, could we involve you guys, like BBC thing or anything like that?
I think we'd be very happy to be involved, because although, I mean, we're not sort of fame hungry, I think that getting this subject out into the world has been hugely helpful to the research. I mean, that's, you know, it's because of the press interest that aphantasia was broadcast widely, and that's why we had our big post bag. So please, very happy to be involved in any sort of outreach that you are involved in.
On that front, are you connected, say, with the teacher training community in some way at a high level, you know, where people are the bodies that are kind of guiding what all teacher training consists of?
No, I mean, so this meeting is really the first meeting that's had an opportunity to explore the implications of aphantasia and aphantasia. So the education workshop is the first step in that direction. But that's certainly something that I think it would be worth doing in the future. Yeah.
Bouncing off of what Alan just said, just before arriving to the conference, and I spoke to Adam about this earlier, I proposed a project to CBC Radio about a documentary on aphantasia, a radio documentary, and it's been greenlit. So if there's, and I've kept it sort of quiet because I've wanted to enjoy this conference as a hyperphantasic. So if there is interest in people wanting to share their personal stories, don't have to be Canadian, just sort of there. Do come and see me. I'll just collect your email addresses, and I'll also send it off to you guys to send out to everyone as well.
Do you know how things sometimes just pop into your head? I was told that a black Motorola phone has been lost. So if anyone's got a black Motorola phone in their bag or pocket, which turns out not to be theirs, please let us know. Any other thoughts or suggestions? Yeah.
There is the Getting Lost website. It's about topological macular disorder, and there seems to be maybe some overlap.
Okay, Getting Lost website. Okay.
Canadian.
Okay, I'll have a look at that. Thank you.
Website sums up exactly. You know what you're getting, don't you?
Right.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Just quickly, so the University of Nottingham, the School of Psychology, has a yearly event called Some Scientist Week, where it's an outreach event where local families bring in their children of different ages to take part in psychological experiments, basically. And I'm really quite eager to incorporate the DBIQ elements in their repertoire. And it's basically families that bring them in every year, so you get developmental trajectory for all these things that they exist. And it's hundreds of things.
Okay, so please keep in touch about that, and we'll gladly collaborate there. Okay, thank you very much. I'll hand over to Fiona now to talk about this morning's discussion group.
Thanks. Before I do that, as well as in the UK, academics are assessed for the research. We're also assessed for our impact, and that means how our research figures outside of the academy in people who, you know, in life outside academia. So one of the things that we're really keen to do, not just for that purpose, but also just to understand what your experience was like here, so that for the next conference we can make things better for you, is get your feedback. So we've got up here the address online where you can fill in the final sort of survey about your experience during the conference, and we would be I know it's a pain, and everyone's surveyed to death these days, but we would really, really appreciate it if you could take the time to fill it in. We will read your answers, and we will change what we do next time in light of them, and also it's very helpful for us to show people that our research really matters, and matters to people who aren't just other academics, so it would be great if you could do this. Joanna, do you want to just stand up and make yourself known? Joanna is around, and if you want to talk to her, she'd be happy to interview people. She has paper versions of the survey and so on, so feel free to go and talk to her if you want to talk further. What I want to do now is just to summarise the discussion that the facilitators had today after the discussion sessions that we had. I think it was quite interesting for me how much there was similarity between the different groups that reported back. So if you recall, the first question was, is there a part of your daily life that your imagery experience or lack of it affects the most? So some people said nothing, it has no impact on my life whatsoever. Some people mentioned relationships, so they found it somewhat disappointing, I guess, that they had no images of friends and family and loved ones that they could just call to mind. Some people reported that they thought they had worse spatial imagery than other people, and that they relied maybe more heavily on maps than they thought maybe other people did. A lot of people talked about how much they loved Google Maps and what a huge difference that had made to their lives. But also some people reported that they thought that they had better spatial imagery, even amongst aphantasics who you might have thought were, a lot of whom reported a lack of spatial awareness. A lot of those people reported that they thought they were better, so that's quite interesting. Some people mentioned misplacing items because they just couldn't visualise where they had put the item down. And certainly in my group we talked about what technology is out there for tracking items that might be helpful in the way that Google Maps might be helpful. Other people mentioned that they felt they couldn't compare items unless they physically had them in front of them. So if they had two items in different rooms, they couldn't just sort of, conjure up the images of them. They had to run between the rooms and kind of sort of look, and they would really wanted them to be together. Some people said that they felt that they weren't so good at learning sequences of instructions. Some hyperphantasics said that they felt easily distracted by their own minds, and that they wanted a little bit more focus on what was going on around them sometimes. Both aphantasics and hyperphantasics reported that they were sometimes anxious. The aphantasics said that was because they kept going over things, if you like, in words. The hyperphantasics said it was because they were reliving things in images. So swings and roundabouts there. Some people mentioned learning, face perception and memory as being particular difficulties that they found. And finally, some people said that creative writing, actually producing writing or reading particularly flowery and literary passages, was not something that they enjoyed or wanted to do, even though maybe that they felt that they should be reading some literary classics, and they felt that they didn't want to do that. The second question was, are there strategies you found yourself using since you realised you're aphantasic or hyperphantasic for remembering and planning? And I think one thing that we found interesting was that a lot of people didn't like the wording of that question. They said, I've had these strategies all my life. I didn't develop them once I came to know that I was aphantasic or hyperphantasic. So we take the point, we're listening. So some people talked a lot about having photos, objects and videos around them as prompts for memories, and maybe feeling very precious about those photos or objects, not wanting to lose them because they felt that would be a way of losing their memory of certain things. Some people mentioned that they did streams of continuous writing as a way of trying to get down on paper what was in their mind. A lot of people said, I just trust my intuitions. Someone said, I trust the chaos inside. And I thought that was quite funny. A lot of people talked about writing preparatory notes, about making lists, about perhaps having a few keywords to remind you of who's who. Someone very interestingly talked about doing mind mapping activities for thinking about and things and problem solving. Some people spoke about, again, verbalising and attaching certain words to things very strongly in their minds. Other people spoke about the importance of learning by doing or learning by repetition. They found that was very useful. Some people wanted silence and isolation to think about problems and to think through solutions to, work problems or so on. Other people wanted noise and to be surrounded by people, and it wasn't obvious to us that that lined up in any way with who was aphantasic and who was hyperphantasic. Other people thought that it was simply counterproductive to try and have strategies or to try and remedy things. They just said, I go with the flow and that's it. One last thing on that question was that some hyperphantasics mentioned that they did a lot of planning visually. So when they were planning, they deliberately and quite intentionally used their very strong imagery ability to help them to do that. Okay, the third question was, are there strategies you found yourself using since you realised you're aphantasic or hyperphantasic, but put that in brackets, for emotional well-being? So, quite interestingly, some people said, I really like feeling that I'm not like everybody else. And other people said, I really like being at this conference because I feel like I'm like everybody else. So that was amusing. Some people said that they felt they were lacking in experience of emotion compared to what they thought might have been normal. A lot of people mentioned photos, how they really liked having photos of loved ones around, and that was a very positive thing for them. Other people said that they really liked sharing their experience with other people. Other people said that they quite often liked withdrawing, being alone, meditating or writing down their thoughts. They found that was a very helpful thing to do for their emotional well-being. A lot of people said self-acceptance, focus on the positive, that's all you need. A lot of people said something a little bit different. They like to live in the moment, just to be able to let go and not think about things. A lot of people said, I like to just block out thoughts of trauma or anything bad that's happened to me. That really helps me too. Sort of focusing in a little bit on what some of the hyperphantasic people said. They said having aphantasic friends is really great and maybe grounds you a little bit. That was interesting. They said they sometimes wanted to do something when they felt bombarded by their own imagery to distract themselves from their own imagery, maybe listening to a podcast or some other technique that they might have similar to that. And the last question was, is there one piece of advice you would give to someone who recently discovered that they were aphantasic or hyperphantasic? One strategy was go on Facebook and meet other people like you. Another suggestion was this isn't a disability, this isn't a condition, and don't pathologise this, please. Other people said one thing you should do is think about how you explain this to other people in your life. Take a bit of time to do that. You might want to do that because it's awareness raising that there is this spectrum, and sort of educating other people is a very good thing to do. Some people said, just don't worry, just accept yourself, that's fine. In sort of sympathy with that, people said, don't let this define you. This is not the source of all your problems. We're all different in all very many ways. And of course, best of all, people suggested, get involved in the research, come to conferences, and come to the next meeting that we hold. So we very much hope that we will be able to hold another meeting. We'd love to be able to do that, and we very much hope that we'll see you again another time to continue our wonderful discussion. So thank you very much.
So that's almost the end, I think. We'll try and put PDFs of the talks on the website, and probably videos of the talks also, assuming that our automatic videoing system has worked. We've talked about the networking. A couple of topics that I think we haven't explored as much as we might, which I'd be very happy people got in touch about. One is this thought that aphantasia might sometimes be the outcome of trauma. A number of people at the conference have mentioned that. Perhaps it would be worthwhile trying to put together a few accounts of such folk to see whether that's a kind of recognisable entity. And then hyperphantasia. We need to do more with hyperphantasia. So if there's anyone who's particularly interested in telling their story, or if there's a group of people who are particularly interested in telling their story, please let me know. Maybe we can try and put a few of those together. And then just one or two thanks. So is Susan around? Where's Susan? Susan slipped away, I think. I want to say thank you to Susan very much for the exhibition as she curated it, and thank you to Matthew, both for the curating the exhibition but also for organising the whole meeting. So Matthew's been kind of constantly working quietly in the background. He often hasn't been in the room because he's been looking after this and that. So thank you very much indeed for making this possible. Thank you all for coming, and keep in touch.